Maya, a spreadsheet-loving, relentlessly single modern woman, falls asleep at her desk and wakes up screaming in agony. She hasn't just transmigrated into the body of Lady Ming, a noblewoman in an ancient, vaguely historical empire. She has transmigrated at the exact moment Lady Ming is giving birth. Surviving childbirth without an epidural is hard enough, but Maya soon discovers the worst part. The original Lady Ming was a notorious tyrant, and the baby's father is Lord Shen, her fiercely cold, brilliant, and sworn political enemy. Thrust into a treacherous estate, Maya must navigate ancient customs, raise a child she didn't conceive, and somehow convince her icy husband that she's no longer the villain he despises, all while falling in love with him. They say love is unpredictable, and today's story proves it. Welcome to Romance Crave Stories, where every episode is full of passion, secrets, and emotional twists. Let's begin. 1 minute, I was staring at a glowing spreadsheet, quietly begging my pivot tables to cooperate before the midnight deadline. The next minute, my lower abdomen was being ripped apart by an invisible, flaming broadsword. Push, my lady. The air is crowning. Wait. Crowning? I gasped, my eyes flying open. Gone was my dual monitor setup. Gone was the hum of the office air conditioner. Instead, I was lying on a massive wooden bed surrounded by panicked women in sweeping, sweat-stained silk robes. A brass basin of bloody water sat on the floor, and I was overcome by the distinct, terrifying sensation of a human being trying to exit my body. Another contraction hit, tearing a feral scream from my throat. Epidural. I shrieked, gripping the silk sheets so hard my knuckles turned white. Get me the anesthesiologist right now. A kindly older woman with her hair pinned back in an elaborate wooden comb dabbed my forehead with a wet, herbal-smelling cloth. Hold on, madam. You must endure. The physician is preparing the ginseng root. Ginseng? I wailed, thrashing against the pillows. I need modern medicine. I need a spinal block. Of course, the women had no idea what I was saying. I didn't even know what I was saying. I had read enough web novels to know about transmigration. Usually you wake up in a cozy, sunlit room with a minor fever. A handsome prince is sitting by your bedside, looking mildly annoyed. You get time to adjust, to scheme, to gracefully adapt. You do not wake up at 8 centimeters dilated. One more push, my lady. For the glory of the Shen household. The midwife hollered, bracing my knees. Having absolutely no other option, and driven purely by biological instinct and blinding pain, I screamed and pushed with the force of a woman who had just lost all her saved data to a system crash. The room erupted into cheers as the sharp cry of a newborn pierced the heavy, incense-laden air. I collapsed back into the pillows, completely drained, my chest heaving. I'm a mother, I thought numbly. I haven't even gone on a date in 3 years, and now I have a child. Before I could process the tiny, swaddled bundle being carried toward me, the heavy wooden doors to the bedchamber crashed open. The room fell dead silent. The midwives dropped to their knees, bowing so low their foreheads touched the floorboards. Framed in the doorway stood a man. He was breathtakingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes as cold as a frozen lake. He wore dark, martial robes embroidered with silver threads, and he looked at me not with the overwhelming joy of a new father, but with absolute, unadulterated loathing. You survived, he said, his voice a dark, velvety sneer. What a pity. Well, that answered the question of whether we were happily married. Chapter 1. You survived, he said, his voice a dark, velvety sneer. What a pity. With a dramatic sweep of his dark, silver-embroidered sleeves, the man I presumed was my husband turned on his heel and strode out of the bedchamber. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind him with a resonant thud that rattled the brass washbasins. I lay there on the massive, silk-draped bed, panting heavily, my hair plastered to my forehead with sweat. The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop, or more accurately, you could hear the terrified, syncopated breathing of the half-dozen midwives still kneeling on the floorboards. Well, I rasped, my throat raw from the screaming. He seems nice. Does he always lead with homicidal disappointment, or is it just Tuesdays? The women remained frozen, their faces pressed to the floor. Finally, a younger girl in a simple green robe, presumably a personal maid, dared to lift her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wide with terror. My lady," she whispered, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Shall I take the young master to the wet nurse now?" I blinked, shifting my gaze down to the small, squirming bundle wrapped in red silk that had been hastily deposited next to my hip. A tiny red, crinkled face peered out from the folds. He let out a soft, disgruntled snuffle, opening one dark, unfocused eye to look at me. My breath hitched. Literally 10 minutes ago, my biggest concern was an Excel spreadsheet with a broken macro. Now I was responsible for a human life. Despite the sheer absurdity of the situation, a fierce, undeniable wave of protectiveness washed over me. "No," I said, my voice firmer this time. I reached out, awkwardly scooping the surprisingly heavy bundle into my arms. "I'll hold him for a minute." The maid gasped softly, as if I had just announced my intention to juggle flaming swords. "But, my lady, you explicitly instructed us to remove the child the moment he was born, so you could recuperate your jade-like beauty." Jade-like beauty? I glanced down at my sweat-stained, exhausted body. If this was jade, it had been heavily aggressively dropped on concrete. "I changed my mind," I said, shifting the baby so his head rested in the crook of my arm. He immediately stopped squirming and let out a contented sigh. "Come here. What is your name?" "It is Xiao, my lady," she squeaked, slowly crawling forward as if approaching a sleeping tiger. "Okay, Xiao. I need you to give me a status report. A summary of current affairs." I paused, realizing from her blank, terrified expression that corporate speak wasn't going to translate. I remembered a passing thought from my web novel binges. People in ancient eras do not know modern terms. They didn't have liability policies, HR departments, or status reports. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Xiao, the labor was intensely difficult. It feels as though a thick fog has descended upon my mind. Tell me, who exactly was that man?" Xiao looked at me as if I had completely lost my mind. "That was Lord Shen, my lady. Your husband. The commander of the northern armies and the emperor's most trusted advisor." "Right. Lord Shen. Excellent title. And why, pray tell, did Lord Shen look at me as if he wanted to personally introduce my neck to a guillotine?" A what, my lady?" "A blade," I amended quickly. "Why does he hate me?" Xiao burst into tears, dropping her forehead back to the floor. "Please spare this lowly servant, my lady. You know why. It is because of the scheme." "The scheme?" I repeated flatly. I looked down at the baby, who was now blowing a tiny spit bubble. "Let me guess. I drugged him, trapped him into a marriage he didn't want, and used my powerful family's political leverage to force the emperor to decree the union." Xiao's head snapped up, her jaw dropping open in sheer astonishment. "Yes. Exactly. You always said it was your most brilliant maneuver." I closed my eyes and let my head fall back against the wooden headboard. Of course. I hadn't just transmigrated. I had transmigrated into the body of the Villainess. A scheming, manipulative, politically toxic antagonist who had forced the kingdom's most powerful, icy, and martial lord into a shotgun wedding. No wonder he was hoping I wouldn't survive childbirth. My demise would have neatly annulled the marriage and left him with a legitimate heir. By surviving, I had effectively ruined his day. "All right," I muttered to myself, slipping naturally into crisis management mode. "Let's review the metrics. I am universally despised. My husband is a heavily armed military genius who hates my guts. My only asset is an infant who currently weighs about 7 pounds and has 0 combat experience." "My lady," Xiao whimpered. I opened my eyes and looked at the terrified girl, then down at the baby in my arms. I had survived a brutal corporate ladder, unreasonable clients, and the sheer agony of unmedicated ancient childbirth. I was not about to get executed by a grumpy warlord because of my predecessor's terrible life choices. "Get me some water, Xiao," I commanded, adjusting my grip on my new son. "And tell the kitchen to make me something to eat. If I'm going to rebrand this entire marriage and avoid an early grave, I'm going to need calories." Chapter 2. An hour later, I was propped up on a mountain of silk pillows, ravenously consuming a bowl of clear chicken and ginger broth that Xiao had procured from the kitchens. The baby, whom I had internally dubbed Mini-Boss, until someone informed me of his actual name, was fast asleep in a gilded wooden cradle near the bed. "All right, Xiao," I said, setting the empty porcelain bowl down on a low table. "Take a seat. We need to have a Q3 review." Xiao, who had been standing rigidly in the corner like a terrified coat rack, blinked. "A Q3, my lady? A performance review? An audit?" A deeply honest conversation about my life choices. I clarified, gesturing to a padded stool beside the bed. Sit. And please, stop looking at me like I'm about to order your execution. It's bad for my blood pressure. Trembling, Xiao perched on the very edge of the stool. I need you to tell me everything, I commanded, leaning forward. My memory is completely fragmented from the trauma of birth. If I am to navigate this household without getting us both killed by my glaringly hostile husband, I need the facts. Don't sugarcoat it. Who am I, and who exactly is angry at me? Xiao swallowed hard. It took some prompting, and a lot of assurances that I wouldn't have her flogged, but slowly, the terrifying reality of my new existence spilled out. As she spoke, my brain automatically categorized the incoming data into a mental spreadsheet. The Lady Ming audit. Current identity, Ming Yu, eldest daughter of the powerful and deeply corrupt Prime Minister Ming. Reputation. Universally terrible. Known for extravagant spending, a violently short temper, and slapping servants for breathing too loudly. The husband, Lord Shen Wei, military prodigy, fiercely loyal to the emperor, and my father's primary political rival. The marriage, a hostile takeover. I had orchestrated a scandal involving a drugged cup of wine, and a very public compromising situation. To save face and avoid a civil war, the emperor decreed the marriage. The master plan. My family's goal was for me to produce a legitimate heir, thereby embedding a Ming spy and future heir directly into the Shen family's seat of power. I rubbed my temples, a profound headache blossoming behind my eyes. So let me get this straight. I am an embedded corporate spy in a hostile merger. My CEO is my corrupt father, and my husband is the opposing CEO who knows exactly what I'm up to. I do not know what a CEO is, my lady, Xiao whispered. But Lord Shen knows of your father's ambitions. He has locked down the estate. You are practically a prisoner in this courtyard. And the baby? I glanced over at the cradle. Xiao lowered her voice to a tragic whisper. You said the child was merely a chess piece. Once he was born, you planned to hand him over to the wet nurses, claim your position as the untouchable matriarch of the Shen household, and begin purging Lord Shen's loyal retainers. Ist der Herr Otzer Leopold. Who writes these plots? Who has the energy for that kind of multi-tiered villainy? I used to complain when I had to schedule 3 Zoom meetings in a row. Now I was supposed to be dismantling a military dynasty from the inside out? Cancel it, I said flatly. Cancel the purge, my lady? Cancel all of it. The scheming, the spying, the hostile purge. I resign. I threw my hands up in the air. I just pushed a human being out of my body. Do you know how exhausted I am? I don't want to overthrow a warlord. I want a nap, a stable income, and a reasonably quiet life. Xiao looked as though she was witnessing a miracle, or perhaps a complete psychotic break. Here is the new policy, Xiao, I said, pointing a stern finger at her. From this day forward, I am no longer a political mastermind. I am a mother. My sole objective is to raise this child, mind my own business, and stay as far away from Lord Shen Wei as humanly possible. If he wants to ignore me, I will consider it a massive win. Just then, a soft wail erupted from the cradle. Mini Boss was awake. Oh, the wet nurse should be here momentarily, my lady, Xiao said, jumping up. Forget the wet nurse, I sighed, swinging my aching legs over the side of the bed. I had read enough historical dramas to know that wet nurses and nannies were prime suspects for poisoning, kidnapping, and general negligent villainy. If this kid was my only anchor in this terrifying world, I was going to micromanage his survival myself. Operation. Harmless as a go, I muttered, picking up the crying baby and cradling him against my chest. Let's hope your terrifying father is a fan of early retirement. Chapter 3. If there is one thing I deeply regret about my transmigration, it is the absolute lack of disposable diapers. Xiao, tell me again how we secure this contraption, I asked, holding up a long, confusing strip of unbleached cotton. Xiao rushed over, her hands hovering nervously as I wrestled with a squirming, unhappy mini boss. You fold it thusly, my lady, and tuck it beneath the silk swaddle. But please allow me. Or better yet, Madame Wu is waiting in the antechamber to take the young master to the nursery courtyard. I paused, pinning the cotton cloth in place with a terrifyingly sharp brass safety pin equivalent. I picked up the baby, who immediately stopped fussing the moment his cheek hit my shoulder. I patted his back rhythmically. Madame Wu? I asked. The head wet nurse, my lady, Xiao explained, wringing her hands. Chosen by the Shen family elders. She has been waiting for 3 days to assume full custody of the young master's care, as is the custom for a woman of your exalted rank. Full custody. My eyes narrowed. I had spent the last 72 hours recovering from childbirth, bonding with this tiny, surprisingly loud human, and establishing a basic baseline of survival. I had named him Shenan, partially because it meant peace, which was heavily ironic given his parents, and partially because it was short and efficient. The idea of handing Shenan over to a stranger appointed by my hostile in-laws felt like voluntarily handing my company's master passwords to a known hacker. Send Madame Wu in, I said, settling back into my mountain of pillows. A moment later, a severe-looking woman in her 50s entered the room. She wore dark, rigid robes and bore an expression that suggested she had just smelled something rotting. She offered a stiff, incredibly shallow bow. My lady, Madame Wu said, her tone dripping with veiled condescension. I am here to relieve you of your burden. It is highly inappropriate for the main wife to soil her hands with infant care. I will take the heir to the eastern courtyard now. She stepped forward, reaching out her hands. Hold on a minute, I said, shifting in and out of her reach. Before we initiate any transfer of deliverables, I need to go over the new standard operating procedures for the nursery. Madame Wu froze. The standard what? The SOPs, I replied breezily, projecting my best project manager in a crisis voice. I pointed to a piece of parchment I had Xiao scrawl on earlier that morning. Since I am the matriarch, the nursery operates under my direct oversight. Here are the new protocols. Sanitation protocols. No one touches the baby without washing their hands in boiling water that has been cooled, using the harsh lye soap. If you sneeze, cough, or look slightly pale, you are banned from the courtyard. The sleep schedule. The baby is not a circus animal. He will not be woken up to be paraded in front of visiting aunties, granduncles, or scheming politicians. Sleep is sacred. Chain of command. The wet nurses report to Xiao. Xiao reports to me. I retain final veto power over all dietary, sleep, and medical decisions. Madame Wu's face turned an impressive shade of puce. This is an outrage. It goes against all noble traditions. A lady of your standing does not meddle in such peasant affairs. Tradition, I said smoothly, is just pressure from dead people, Madame Wu. And right now, the living matriarch is telling you that if you try to take my son to a separate courtyard, I will personally throw a very heavy, very expensive vase at your head. The room plunged into a stunned silence. The original Lady Ming was known for throwing things, so the threat carried a heavy, terrifying weight. But instead of screaming about political leverage or demanding jewels, she was threatening violence over hand-washing and nap times. Madame Wu bowed so fast she nearly tipped over. As you command, my lady. I shall prepare the wet nurses according to your protocols. She scrambled out of the room as if pursued by demons. Once the door clicked shut, Xiao let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a minute. My lady, the estate will be gossiping about this by nightfall. Let them, I said, looking down at Shenan, who was now blowing milk bubbles in his sleep. Good management is often misunderstood in its early stages. What I didn't realize, of course, was exactly who would be receiving these gossipy status reports. Across the estate, my terrifying husband was about to get a very confusing update regarding his supposedly evil wife. Chapter 4. For the first month of An's life, Lord Shen Wei completely vanished. According to Xiao, he was inspecting the northern garrisons, which I accurately translated to trying to avoid his terrifying wife and the lovely screaming potato she produced. This absence was a massive operational victory. Without him looming around, I successfully transformed my courtyard into a highly efficient, strictly sanitized, baby-centric headquarters. The Ming family spies had been reassigned to laundry duty. The wet nurses were terrified of my SOPs. And I had finally figured out how to secure a cloth diaper without stabbing my own thumb. Life was almost peaceful. Until the Tuesday he came back. It was late afternoon. The late summer sun was streaming through the carved wooden lattice windows, casting a warm, golden glow across the floorboards. I had ordered all the heavy, oppressive velvet drapes taken down to let in the light. I was currently sitting cross-legged on a large woven mat in the center of the room, engaging in mandatory tummy time with Shenan. All right, buddy, you can do it, I coaxed, shaking a wooden rattle. Anan grunted, his tiny face red with the sheer, monumental effort of lifting his own head. To keep morale high, I had resorted to singing. Since I didn't know any ancient lullabies, I was improvising with the only lyrics my sleep-deprived brain could recall. Early 2000s pop anthems. "'Cause the baby's gonna cry, 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 cry," I crooned off-key, shimmying my shoulders. Anan let out a wet, gurgling giggle, completely enchanted by my lack of vocal talent. "And the baby should sleep, 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 sleep. Baby, I wanna sleep, sleep, sleep." I grabbed his tiny, chubby arms and gently wiggled them. "Sleep, baby, please sleep." "What?" a deep, chilling voice demanded. "In the name of the ancestors are you doing?" I shrieked, dropping the wooden rattle, and spun around. Lord Shen stood in the doorway. He was still wearing his dark, silver-plated riding armor, a heavy wool cape dusting the floor behind him. He looked like a wrathful god of war who had just stepped off a bloody battlefield. Except right now, the wrath was entirely eclipsed by profound, paralyzing confusion. His sharp eyes darted from me, sitting undignified on the floor with my hair tied up in a messy bun, to the baby, who was now blowing a massive spit bubble. He looked around the room, taking in the open windows, the absence of Ming family guards, and the distinct lack of poison vials or treasonous ledgers. "Oh," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello. You're back." Shen's jaw tightened. He took a slow, deliberate step into the room. "The head steward informed me you had seized total control of the nursery. I assumed you were sequestering the heir to establish a Ming stronghold within my walls." "A stronghold?" I echoed, dusting off my silk skirt as I scrambled to my feet. "It's a nursery. The only thing I'm hoarding in here is breast milk and clean burp cloths." He ignored my remark, his gaze locking onto the woven mat. "Why are you on the floor? And what was that bizarre, tuneless chanting?" "First of all, that song was amazing. It could be a global song." I shot back defensively, my modern instincts temporarily overriding my survival instincts. "Second of all, it's called tummy time. It develops core neck strength so he doesn't wobble around like a bobblehead." Lord Shen stared at me as if I were speaking a completely foreign language, which given the context, I essentially was. He took another step toward the mat, his heavy boots echoing loudly in the quiet room. Panic spiked in my chest. "Sanitation protocols." "Halt!" I barked, throwing my hand up like a traffic cop. Shen froze, his hand instinctively dropping to the hilt of his sword. His eyes narrowed into deadly slits. "Are you ordering me to halt in my own estate, Mingyu? You just came from the stables." I gestured wildly to his dusty armor. "You are a walking biohazard. If you want to come within 6 feet of the primary deliverable, I mean the baby, you need to scrub your hands with lye soap and remove the cape. Do you have any idea what the infant mortality rate is in this time period? I am not letting camp fever enter this sterile zone." For a long, agonizing moment, the commander of the Northern Armies simply stared at me. He looked at my outstretched hand, then down at the baby, who had finally managed to lift his head and was currently staring at his father with wide, dark eyes that were a mirror image of Shen's own. I braced myself, fully expecting him to draw his sword and end my transmigration right then and there. Instead, a strange, complicated expression flickered across his icy features. He looked at the wash basin in the corner, then back at me. Slowly, deliberately, he unclasped his heavy cape, letting it fall to the floor. "Lye soap," he repeated slowly, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "Yes," I said, exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding. "And scrub up to the elbows." "Thank you." As he walked over to the basin, I scooped in and up, holding him tightly against my chest. Lord Shen Wei might have returned, but if he thought he was going to disrupt my perfectly managed ecosystem, he had another thing coming. Chapter 5. The wailing started at exactly what felt like 2 a.m., sounding less like a human infant, and more like a car alarm crossed with a dying pterodactyl. It had been 3 days. 3 agonizing, sleep-deprived days since Anne's first tooth decided to make its violent debut. My carefully constructed schedules were in ruins. The wet nurses were hiding in the eastern wing out of sheer terror of my sleep-deprived wrath, and my under-eye bags were heavy enough to incur excess baggage fees. "Shoo, I know, buddy, I know," I rasped, pacing the length of the bedchamber in a rumpled white inner robe. I patted Anand's back, bouncing gently on my heels. His tiny forehead was uncomfortably warm, his cheeks flushed with a low-grade fever. I would have traded my entire imperial jewelry box for a single bottle of infant Tylenol. Instead, I had a lukewarm washcloth smelling faintly of mint, which Shen forcefully batted away with a chubby, furious fist. The bedchamber doors burst open. Lord Shen Wei stood there, his hair unbound and spilling over the shoulders of a dark silk sleep robe. For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't look like a poised, untouchable god of war. He looked panicked. What is wrong with him? Shen demanded, closing the distance between us in 3 long strides. Is it poison? Have your father's assassins finally breached the courtyard? I will summon the physician. It's not poison, Rambo, I snapped, far too exhausted to filter my modern sarcasm or maintain my noble deference. It's a tooth. He is growing a calcium spike out of his gums, and he is very angry about it. Also, lower your voice. You're overstimulating him. Shen stopped dead in his tracks, blinking at my utter lack of respect. I didn't care. The corporate hierarchy was temporarily suspended. We were in the trenches of the night shift now. Here, I said, shoving the screaming, feverish bundle directly into the commander of the Northern Army's arms. Tag in. I have been walking this perimeter for 3 hours. My lower back is staging a rebellion. Shen instinctively caught the baby, freezing like a statue as Shen immediately grabbed a fistful of his father's expensive silk robe and wailed directly into his collarbone. What do I do? Shen asked, his voice entirely stripped of its usual icy command. He looked down at the screaming infant, as if he were holding a live grenade. You walk. You bounce. You project calm, authoritative dad energy, I instructed, collapsing onto the edge of the large wooden bed with a heavy sigh. I rubbed my aching temples. And sing. Or hum. Just make a low, repetitive noise. It distracts him. For a moment, I thought Shen might actually call the guards to have me arrested for insubordination. Instead, he stiffly began to pace. He was rigid at first, his steps too sharp, but slowly he found a rhythm. A deep, resonant hum began to vibrate from his chest. A slow, melodic battle march, completely devoid of lyrics but rich with a heavy, soothing bass. Miraculously, the crying hitched. Shen sniffled, rubbed his wet face against Shen's chest, and let out a long, shuddering sigh. I slumped against the bedpost, closing my eyes. Oh, thank God. You have the magic touch. You're officially promoted to Chief Soothing Officer. You speak in riddles, Mingyu, Shen said quietly. His pacing brought him closer to the bed, and he sat down cautiously on the edge, keeping the baby cradled securely against his chest. I cracked one eye open. In the dim, flickering light of the single oil lamp, he looked impossibly handsome, his sharp profile softened by the shadows and the tiny child sleeping against his heart. I'm just tired, I murmured, all my defenses entirely stripped away by the hour and the exhaustion. I don't want to fight you, Shen Wei. I don't want to scheme. I just want him to be okay. Shen looked at me. It wasn't the glaring, suspicious look he usually gave me, trying to uncover a hidden trap. It was a long, searching gaze. He saw the dark circles under my eyes, the spit up on my shoulder, and the absolute sincerity in my drooping posture. You did not let the nurses take him, he noted softly. You have not slept in 3 days. The normal you would have banished a crying child to the farthest corner of the estate. The normal me was an idiot easy to take advantage of. I whispered, my eyes sliding shut as exhaustion finally pulled me under. Wake me up. If his fever spikes. I didn't feel it when my head tipped to the side, but I dimly registered the warmth of a heavy wool cape being draped gently over my shoulders, and the soft, rumbling hum of my terrifying husband keeping watch in the dark. Chapter 6. If you pull those strings any tighter, Xiao, my internal organs are going to merge into a single, highly compressed super organ. I wheezed, gripping the edge of my dressing table. But my lady, the Imperial Autumn Banquet requires the utmost elegance. Xiao chirped, mercilessly yanking the silk ties of my elaborate, multi-layered crimson gown. You must outshine the other noblewomen. I would settle for outbreathing them, I muttered. It had been 2 months since the teething incident, and my tentative, incredibly fragile truce with Lord Shen had held. He still looked at me like I was a complex puzzle missing half its pieces, but the glaring hostility had downgraded to intense, brooding curiosity. Now, however, we faced a new threat. Society. Leaving Shen under the fiercely guarded, hyper-sanitized protection of my newly reformed, terrified staff, I met Shen Wei in the courtyard. He wore deep ceremonial robes of black and gold, looking so devastatingly handsome that my brain temporarily forgot how to formulate words. He offered his arm, his expression unreadable, and escorted me to the carriage. The imperial palace was a sprawling, glittering maze of gilded roofs, silk lanterns, and treacherous politics. The banquet hall was already packed with nobles radiating fake smiles and hidden daggers. "Stay close," Shen murmured as we crossed the threshold, his voice dropping to a low, protective register. "Your father's allies are everywhere. They will expect you to report on your progress." "Let them expect," I replied, grabbing a cup of watered-down plum wine from a passing servant. "I am officially out of office." It didn't take long. Shen was pulled away by a group of heavily decorated generals, leaving me exposed by the dessert tables. Like a shark smelling blood in the water, a woman in a violently bright purple gown slithered through the crowd toward me. My brain auditor immediately flagged her. Lady Zhao, my predecessor's closest friend and co-conspirator. "Ming Yu," Lady Zhao whispered, linking her arm through mine with bruising force. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were venomous. "We have been waiting for word. Have you secured the keys to his private study? My father says the time to strike the Shen family's supply lines is drawing near." I took a slow sip of my wine, engaging my ultimate defense mechanism. Corporate PR speak. "Actually, Zhao," I said, pitching my voice to a breezy professional volume. "We are currently changing our core strategy. A hostile purge just doesn't align with our Q4 objectives." Lady Zhao blinked, her fake smile freezing. I beg your pardon? A Q4? "Yes. After doing a thorough risk assessment, I've decided to deprioritize external forces to focus on internal infrastructure." I continued smoothly, brushing a non-existent speck of dust from my silk sleeve. "We are really looking to synergize our household assets right now." "Synergize?" she repeated, looking at me as if I had just started speaking in tongues. What are you talking about? Have you poisoned his tea or not?" "Listen, Zhao," I said, leaning in and placing a condescending, deeply corporate hand on her shoulder. "I appreciate your positive energy, but frankly, treason just isn't in my current bandwidth. I'm operating at maximum capacity managing the nursery deliverables. If you want to discuss this further, you'll have to reach out to my maid, Xiao, to pick a day for a meeting. But fair warning, my time is booked through the new year." I patted her shoulder, gave her a bright, empty smile, and turned away, leaving Lady Zhao standing by the candied dates with her mouth hanging open in sheer, unadulterated bewilderment. "What exactly," a dark velvet voice murmured directly into my ear, "is a bandwidth?" I jumped, nearly spilling my plum wine. Lord Shen was standing right behind me. He must have slipped away from the generals to eavesdrop. "It's an advanced tactical term." I lied without missing a beat, looking up at him. "I need to stop using modern terms here, but I can't help it. It means I don't have the time or the crayons to explain things to her." Shen looked from me to the deeply confused, retreating form of Lady Zhao. For a long moment he didn't say anything. And then, right there in the middle of the glittering, treacherous imperial banquet, the commander of the northern armies did something I had never seen him do before. He laughed. It wasn't a cold, mocking sound. It was a genuine deep rumble of amusement that completely transformed his face, making him look impossibly younger and terrifyingly attractive. "You are entirely maddening," Shen said, his eyes glittering with a new, dangerous kind of heat as he offered me his arm again. "Come, my mysterious wife. Let us go synergize with the Emperor." I don't think he knows what that means. Chapter 7. I was halfway through a highly dramatic, whispered rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody, because an appreciated a good vocal range, when the first scream shattered the quiet of the night. It was followed immediately by the unmistakable, terrifying ring of steel clashing against steel. I froze, the lyrics dying in my throat. I clutched an tighter to my chest. In the dim light of the nursery, Xiao's face drained of all color. She dropped the stack of clean linen she was holding, her whole body trembling. "My lady," she gasped, her voice barely a squeak. "The perimeter has been breached," I finished for her, my corporate crisis management brain slamming into overdrive, completely overriding my panic. "Don't just stand there, Xiao. Barricade the door." Driven by sheer adrenaline, I gently deposited a sleeping into his reinforced wooden cradle, and sprinted toward the heavy oak doors. Together, Xiao and I shoved the massive, brass-bound chest of drawers in front of the entrance. We followed it up with a vanity table and 2 heavy chairs. Outside, the sounds of combat were growing louder. Shouts, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the courtyard stones, and the splintering of wood. My father's political rivals, or perhaps even my father himself, angry at my lack of progress, had decided a hostile purge was back on the menu. And in ancient politics, the primary target was always the heir. "We need weapons," I barked, spinning around to scan the room. "Welp, my lady, we are women of the inner chambers. We have hairpins." Xiao sobbed, sinking to her knees. "Hairpins are for amateurs," I snapped. My eyes landed on the corners of the room, which were decorated with massive, waist-high antique porcelain vases. They were probably priceless artifacts from a previous dynasty, worth more than a modern penthouse. "Time to weaponize the decor," I muttered. I grabbed the heavy bronze fire poker from the hearth with one hand, and tipped a massive celadone vase toward me with the other, rolling it like a bowling ball toward the center of the room. I stood between the cradle and the lattice window, my makeshift arsenal ready. A moment later, the paper and wood of the window shattered inward. A man dressed in entirely black tactical gear scrambled through the frame, a wickedly curved sword glinting in his hand. He locked eyes with me, clearly expecting a screaming, cowering noblewoman. He did not expect a deeply sleep-deprived mother wielding a 50-pound priceless antique. "Per my last email," I screamed, hoisting the massive vase with a burst of hysterical, maternal super strength and hurling it directly at his head. The heavy porcelain connected with a deafening crash, shattering into 1,000 pieces and dropping the assassin to the floor like a sack of potatoes. Before I could even celebrate my victory, the barricaded door splintered open. 2 more assassins shoved their way through the narrow gap, kicking the heavy vanity table aside. One lunged toward the cradle. "Oh, absolutely not," I snarled, gripping the bronze fire poker with both hands like a baseball bat. I swung it with everything I had, catching the man right in the kneecap. He howled, dropping to the floor, but the second assassin raised his sword, stepping over his fallen comrade, his eyes fixed on me. I braced myself, pulling an Anne's cradle behind my legs, raising my poker for a desperate block. Suddenly, a spray of dark blood painted the shattered doorframe. The assassin went rigid before collapsing forward, revealing the towering, blood-soaked figure of Lord Shen Wei standing behind him. Shen's silver armor was covered in gore, his sword dripping, his chest heaving with exertion. His eyes were wild, frantic as they swept the room, entirely prepared to find his heir slaughtered and his treacherous wife long gone, having used the child as a distraction to escape. Instead he saw me. I was panting heavily, my hair falling out of its pins, barefoot, clutching a fire poker in one hand and the rim of an Anne's cradle in the other. I stood defensively over the baby, practically vibrating with feral, protective rage, surrounded by the shattered remains of his family's priceless heirlooms and 3 unconscious or dying men. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by an An, who had finally woken up and let out a soft, confused whimper. I dropped the fire poker. It hit the floorboards with a loud clang. My adrenaline abruptly flatlined, my knees turning to jelly. I sank to the floor, pulling in and out of the cradle and burying my face in his soft, sweet-smelling neck, my whole body shaking. Shen Wei stepped over the bodies, entirely ignoring the carnage. He dropped his sword. He dropped to his knees right in front of me, his large, calloused hands gripping my shoulders. "You didn't run," he breathed, his voice raw, stripped of all its usual cold command. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the very first time. "You stayed. You fought for him." "I am the manager of this nursery," I choked out, a hysterical, tearful laugh escaping my throat as I clutched his armor, not caring about the blood. "Nobody terminates my deliverables." Shen didn't ask what a deliverable was. At this point he should already know some terms. He just closed his eyes, let out a shuddering breath, and pulled both me and our son against his chest, wrapping his heavy, blood-stained arms around us in an iron grip. Chapter 8. The mandatory relocation of our headquarters happened at dawn the next morning. "I am not asking, Mingyu," Lord Shen had stated, his tone brooking absolutely no argument as a small army of heavily armored guards cleared out the wreckage of my nursery. "Your courtyard is compromised. You and the boy will be moving into the main pavilion with me." I didn't have the energy to argue. Plus, his pavilion was essentially a medieval panic room surrounded by elite swordsmen, which aligned perfectly with my new core objective of not getting assassinated. However, Lord Shen's private quarters were exactly what you would expect from an emotionally repressed warlord. Massive, drafty, filled with dark mahogany furniture, and displaying a startling number of decorative weapons. It had all the warmth of a corporate server room. Within 2 hours, I had completely ruined his aesthetic. Put the padded floor mats over there, past the rack of broadswords. I directed a team of bewildered soldiers, pointing toward the center of Shen's massive study. And Xiao, make sure the diaper boiling cauldron is set up downwind of the study windows. I refused to compromise our air quality. Shen Wei watched this hostile interior takeover from behind his massive, scroll-laden desk. He hadn't said a word, but his dark eyes tracked my every movement with intense, calculated scrutiny. He was waiting. After last night's adrenaline wore off, his deeply ingrained paranoia had returned. He was searching for the crack in my armor, the moment the old Lady Ming would reappear and demand political concessions for saving the air. He was going to be waiting a very long time. By late afternoon, I was sitting on the newly installed padded mats, aggressively mashing steamed carrots in a porcelain bowl. Anan was rolling around on his stomach next to me, happily babbling at a heavily fortified wall. "You have not mentioned your father," Shen said suddenly, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. I didn't look up, focusing on achieving the perfect carrot puree. Is it his birthday? Am I supposed to send a gift? Shen stood up, walking around his desk to tower over me. He crossed his arms over his broad chest. The assassins bore the insignia of the western provinces. Your father's domain. Yet you have not demanded I spare his life, nor have you threatened me with his retaliation. Why? Because if my father sent men to chop up my baby, I hope you feed him to your warhorses, I said flatly, finally looking up. I don't play team sports with murderers, Shen Wei. He narrowed his eyes, kneeling down onto the mat, so we were eye level. He was so close I could smell the sandalwood and leather on his clothes. It was highly distracting. Who are you? He asked softly, his gaze piercing. You have no interest in power. You speak like a foreign scholar. You fight like a cornered wolf. The woman I married would have sacrificed this child to save her own silk slippers. Well, people change, I deflected, feeling my face heat up under his intense scrutiny. Consider it a massive software update. Mingyu 2.0. Now with fewer treasonous bugs and enhanced maternal features. Shen stared at me, clearly trying to decipher the metaphor. Before he could demand clarification, a very distinct, deeply ominous sound echoed from an Anne's general direction. PBBBBBT. A smell that could only be described as a biological weapon instantly filled the airspace. Shen's nose wrinkled. He looked at the baby in alarm. What is happening? Is he ill? No, he's just successfully executed a heavy smelly dump, I sighed, setting the carrots down. I looked at Shen, an evil, brilliant idea forming in my mind. If he wanted to micromanage me, we were going to engage in some cross-functional collaboration. I reached over, scooped in an up, and deposited the foul-smelling, squirming baby directly into the lap of the commander of the northern armies. Shen froze, his arms hovering uselessly in the air. What are you doing? You wanted to interrogate me? Fine. But we multitask in this household, I said, tossing a stack of unbleached cotton cloths onto his lap. If you want to stare at me and psychoanalyze, test my personality, you have to change a diaper. Unpin the cloth. Wipe thoroughly. Do not drop him. Mingyu, I command legions, Shen said, genuine panic edging into his voice as Anan grabbed the front of his dark silk tunic with sticky hands. I do not deal in human waste. Leadership means getting your hands dirty, General. I grinned, crossing my legs and leaning back on my hands. Go on. The clock is ticking. And if you gag, the baby will sense your weakness. For the next 10 minutes, I watched the most feared military strategist in the Empire get absolutely decimated by an 8-pound infant and a soiled piece of cloth. Shen's jaw was clenched in fierce concentration, his fingers moving with agonizing, terrified slowness as I ruthlessly critiqued his technique. You missed a spot on the left flank, I pointed out unhelpfully. Silence, he gritted out, his face slightly flushed. But he didn't call for the maids. He didn't order me to do it. He painstakingly finished the task, securing the clean cloth with a surprisingly gentle touch, before lifting Anan under the armpits and holding him out like a prized trophy. It is done, Shen announced, looking ridiculously proud of himself. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A real, breathless laugh that echoed loudly in the cavernous study. Shen Wei slowly lowered the baby to his chest, his eyes locking onto my face. The icy, suspicious guard that had defined every interaction we'd ever had was entirely gone, melted away by the sheer domestic absurdity of the moment. In its place was a look of such profound, blazing warmth that my heart performed a dangerous, uncoordinated flip in my chest. He looks so good. Good-looking men could also kill you, I remind myself. You have a beautiful laugh, he said softly, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver straight down my spine. Suddenly, the massive study felt very, very small. Chapter 9. I had just successfully introduced the concept of double-entry bookkeeping to the Shen estate's bewildered head steward, when the bushes in the inner courtyard began to aggressively rustle. It was a crisp autumn afternoon. Anin was napping safely inside the heavily guarded pavilion, and I was sitting at a stone table in the garden, aggressively color-coding a stack of bamboo ledgers. My lady, should I summon the guards? Xiao asked, holding a pot of jasmine tea like a weapon. It might be a wild boar. Before I could answer, the rhododendron bush parted, and a man tumbled onto the manicured grass. He didn't look like a boar. He was dressed in flowing, pristine white scholar's robes and possessed the kind of delicate, tragic handsomeness that suggested he spent a lot of time writing bad poetry in the rain. He scrambled to his feet, struck a deeply dramatic pose, and looked at me with tear-filled eyes. He gasped, clutching his chest as if physically pained by my beauty. My moon. I have braved 1,000 perils to reach you. I slowly lowered my red ink brush. I looked at the man, then looked at Xiao. Who is this walking weird violation? Xiao looked as though she was about to faint. And my lady. That is Scholar Lin. Lin Fan. He is. She mouthed the words your secret lover with wide, terrified eyes. My mental spreadsheet screeched to a halt. Audit of Scholar Lin. Former paramour. Co-conspirator. Massive liability. My love, Lin Fan crooned, rushing forward and dropping to his knees beside the stone table. He reached out to grab my hands. Back up, I snapped, pulling my hands away and pointing my ink brush at him like a makeshift taser. Maintain a 3-foot distance, please. I am operating a clean zone here, and you just crawled through a heavily fertilized shrub. Lin Fan blinked, visibly thrown by my lack of swooning. It is me. I know you are playing a deep game, pretending to play the dutiful wife to fool that barbarian Shen Wei, but you do not need to act with me. Have you secured his official seal? Your father is ready to mobilize the troops once we frame him for treason. A cold spike of adrenaline hit my stomach. Treason. Framing. This wasn't just an annoying ex. This was a live grenade threatening to blow up my carefully constructed, highly peaceful co-parenting arrangement. Listen to me very carefully, Lin Fan, I said, standing up and towering over him. I am going to need you to voluntarily off-board yourself from this estate immediately. Off-board, he echoed. Terminate your employment. Quit. Leave. I clarified, my voice dropping to a harsh, serious register. There is no deep game. There is no plot, no treason. I am no longer connected to my father's toxic treasonous culture, and I am certainly not connected with you. Lin Fan's delicate face twisted into an ugly, entitled sneer. He stood up, trying to loom over me. You lie? You belong to me. You promised we would rule the capital together. You cannot simply abandon our cause for that bloodthirsty warlord. Actually, I can, I countered fiercely, tapping my ink brush against the table for emphasis. Let's review the story, shall we? Shen Wei is a highly effective leader, a stable provider, and he is actively improving his diaper-changing times. He protects my son. You are an unemployed poet who sneaks into bushes and wants me to commit capital treason. The future of this relationship is absolutely zero. We are done. Permanently. You, Lin Fan snarled, lunging forward to grab my arm. He never made it. Before his fingers could even brush my sleeve, a massive, black-gloved hand clamped down on the back of Lin Fan's neck, violently halting his momentum. Lord Shen Wei stepped out from the shadows of the pavilion corridor. He radiated an aura of such absolute, lethal fury that the temperature in the garden seemed to drop 10 degrees. His silver armor glinted in the sun, but it was his eyes, dark, blazing, and fixed on Lin Fan like a predator about to snap a rabbit's spine. That truly terrified me. Take your hands, Shen whispered, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the air. Away from my wife. With a casual, terrifying display of strength, Shen hoisted the scholar off the ground and unceremoniously hurled him backward. Lin Fan crashed into the rhododendron bush with a high-pitched yelp. Instantly, a dozen heavily armed guards materialized from the perimeter, swords drawn. "Take him to the dungeons," Shen commanded without taking his eyes off me. "See how many poems he can write without his fingers." As the guards dragged a screaming, sobbing Lin Fan away, silence fell over the courtyard. Xiao had discreetly melted into the background, leaving just the two of us. Shen Wei stepped closer to the stone table. The lethal fury in his eyes was shifting, melting into something much darker, much heavier, and infinitely more possessive. He had heard everything. "An excellent co-parent?" Shen repeated, his voice dropping an octave as he stopped inches away from me. Well, you are improving," I stammered, suddenly hyper-aware of how tall he was, how broad his shoulders were, and the intense heat radiating from his body. Shen reached out, gently plucking the red ink brush from my trembling fingers, and tossing it onto the table. He didn't step back. Instead, he lifted his hand, his calloused knuckles brushing softly against my cheek. "You defended me," he murmured, his thumb tracing my jawline, sending a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "You claimed me over your past. Over your family." "I claimed my peace," I whispered, though my heart was hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "No," Shen said softly, leaning in until his breath ghosted across my lips, a possessive, triumphant gleam in his dark eyes. "You claimed me, Mingyu, and I do not intend to ever let you off board." Chapter 10. When Lord Shen Wei informed me that we were leaving the heavily fortified safety of the estate for a mandatory inspection of the capital's commercial sector, I immediately assumed the worst. I expected to be dragged through grimy supply depots, auditing grain silos and counting military rations. I did not expect a mandatory off-site team building exercise at the annual Autumn Lantern Festival. "Is this a trap?" I asked suspiciously, clutching the edges of my heavy, fur-lined cloak. We were standing at the edge of the capital's main thoroughfare. The entire city was completely transformed. Thousands of glowing silk lanterns shaped like dragons, lotus flowers, and mythical beasts floated above the bustling streets. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts, spun sugar, and sweet wine. Shen looked down at me, looking devastatingly handsome in casual, dark civilian robes that hid his armor, but did absolutely nothing to hide the broad, muscular span of his shoulders. "It is not a trap, Mingyu," he said, the corners of his mouth twitching with a suppressed smile. "Consider it a scheduled break in your operational duties." I blinked. "Did you just use my corporate jargon against me?" "I am a highly effective learner," he replied smoothly. He held out his hand. "The crowds are dense. Take my hand so you do not get mismanaged." I let out a startled laugh and slipped my hand into his. His fingers immediately closed around mine, warm, calloused, and overwhelmingly secure. We walked through the festival, and for the first time since my transmigration, I wasn't constantly scanning the perimeter for assassins or checking the loyalty of the people around me. Without the suffocating politics of the estate, Shen Wei was an entirely different person. He bought me candied hawthorn sticks from a terrified street vendor. He won a deeply unaerodynamic wooden duck at a ring toss stall by aggressively glaring at the merchant, until the man just handed it over out of sheer intimidation. It was against all odds a date, and a spectacularly good one. As the night deepened, Shen steered us away from the chaotic main square and up a secluded stone bridge that arched over the city's glittering river. Hundreds of small, candle-lit lotus lanterns drifted along the water below us, painting the night in warm gold. I leaned against the stone balustrade, biting the head off my wooden duck's candy replica. "I have to admit, your event planning skills are top tier. I rate this trip a solid 10 out of 10. Shen didn't look at the river. He was looking at me. "I owe you an apology," he said suddenly. The quiet, raw sincerity in his voice made me stop chewing. I turned to look at him. The teasing glint in his eyes was gone, replaced by a heavy, vulnerable intensity. "When you were in labor," Shen continued, taking a step closer, "I told you it was a pity you survived. I wished you dead, Mingyu. I saw you only as a venomous snake my enemies had thrown into my bed." He reached out, his warm knuckles grazing the side of my face, pushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "It is the greatest failure of my judgment. Because the woman standing before me is the bravest, most fiercely brilliant person I have ever known." My breath caught in my throat. All my witty, corporate deflective shields instantly powered down. Shen Wei. I do not understand half the words you say, he whispered, stepping entirely into my personal space, his hands coming to rest on my waist. I do not know what a bandwidth is or an ROI. But I know that you consume my every waking thought. I know that watching you protect our son makes me want to burn the world down to keep you both safe. It was slow, but through all these months I have fallen entirely, helplessly in love with you. My heart hammered a frantic, ecstatic rhythm against my ribs. Even if I tell you that I'm not the woman you married? Thank the ancestors you are not the woman I married, he breathed. In that case, I whispered, reaching up to grip the lapels of his dark robes. I am fully prepared to accept your merger proposal. Shen let out a soft, rough sound that was half laugh, half groan. He didn't ask for clarification. He simply pulled me flush against his chest, lowered his head, and kissed me. It wasn't a cold, strategic kiss. It was deep, consuming, and fiercely passionate, carrying months of built-up tension and unspoken yearning. My hands tangled in his dark hair as the sky above us suddenly erupted in a shower of golden sparks. The festival fireworks had begun, exploding in brilliant colors over the river, but I barely registered the booming sounds. Right there on the bridge, surrounded by light and held in the arms of a warlord who had successfully hacked his way into my heart, I finally felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Chapter 11. The honeymoon phase of our newly established romantic merger lasted exactly 36 hours before my father decided to initiate a hostile takeover of the entire empire. I was in the middle of feeding an enmashed peas when the heavy courtyard doors burst open. It wasn't assassins this time. It was a contingent of imperial guards, their gold-crested armor clanking ominously. At their head was Lord Shen Wei, looking utterly thunderous, his hands bound tightly in heavy iron chains. What is the meaning of this? I demanded, dropping the wooden spoon. Stay back, Mingyu, Shen ordered, his voice tight. Your father has presented evidence to the emperor. They claim I have been embezzling military funds to finance a rebellion. They have ledgers. Ledgers? I repeated, my ears perking up. Forged, of course. Shen sneered at the imperial captain holding his chains. But the emperor is paranoid. The trial is immediate. I am being taken to the Great Hall. He locked his dark eyes on me, his expression softening into desperate instruction. Barricade the pavilion. Protect our son. Do not leave this estate. Right. Got it. Barricade, protect, hide. I nodded rapidly. The moment the guards marched Shen out of the courtyard, I turned to Xiao. Xiao, where does the head steward keep the copies of the military supply records? Xiao gasped. In the central archives. But my lady, Lord Shen explicitly ordered you to hide. Lord Shen is a military genius, not a certified public accountant, I snapped, tossing the bowl of peas aside and hiking up my heavy silk skirts. If my father thinks he can use forged ledgers to execute my husband and ruin my family's life, he has entirely underestimated my bandwidth. Fetch my heaviest cloak and a very large abacus. 2 hours later, I was standing in front of the towering mahogany doors of the Emperor's Great Hall. Inside, I could hear my father, Prime Minister Ming, loudly pontificating about Shen Wei's treasonous greed. I didn't wait for the eunuchs to announce me. I kicked the doors open with my velvet-slippered foot. Say I will probably die without the general either way, no need to be nice. The massive hall plunged into stunned silence. The Emperor, sitting high on the dragon throne, blinked in shock. My father, standing next to a mountain of bamboo scrolls, dropped his jaw. And Shen Wei, kneeling in the center of the hall in his chains, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. My apologies for interrupting this deeply inefficient meeting, I announced, marching straight down the center aisle, followed closely by a trembling Xiao who was hauling a massive sack of scrolls. But I have reviewed the victim's documentation, and frankly, the math is embarrassing. Mingyu, my father roared, his face turning purple. Have you lost your mind? Guards, remove this hysterical woman. I am not hysterical, father. I am conducting a proper search, I shot back, ignoring the guards who hesitated to touch a high-ranking noblewoman. I reached the center of the hall, bowed deeply to the Emperor, and then turned to the mountain of evidence. Your Majesty, I addressed the throne, my voice ringing clear and authoritative. The Prime Minister claims these ledgers prove my husband diverted 10,000 taels of silver from the northern garrison. However, whoever forged these documents clearly does not understand double-entry bookkeeping. I unrolled a scroll and held it up, If you look at the Q2, the summer expenditures, the debit column shows a massive outflow for grain. But there is no corresponding credit in the transport or storage accounts. Furthermore, the dates on these requisitions align with the monsoon season, a period when the northern supply roads are entirely washed out. It is physically impossible to move that volume of grain without a fleet of imperial barges, which according to the harbor master's logs, were all docked in the south. I threw the scroll onto the floor and picked up another. Additionally, the interest rate calculated on this supposed illicit money compounds monthly, but the sum listed at the bottom relies on a flat yearly rate. It's beginner math, Your Majesty. This isn't evidence of treason. It's evidence of gross greed and incompetence by whoever my father hired to fake these books. The hall was dead silent. Even the imperial scholars sitting in the gallery were leaning forward, their eyes wide as they furiously ran my calculations in their heads. She is correct, one of the head scholars suddenly gasped, dropping his abacus. The sums do not balance. The entire ledger is mathematically impossible. The emperor's gaze darkened. He turned his terrifying, absolute focus onto Prime Minister Ming, who was now sweating profusely, looking desperately for an exit. Prime Minister, care to explain these discrepancies? I didn't stick around for my father's blubbering defense. The moment the emperor ordered the imperial guards to seize the Ming family retainers, I turned my back on the chaos and dropped to my knees in front of Shen Wei. I pulled a hairpin from my hair and began aggressively picking the crude lock on his chains. Shen just stared at me. He looked at the chaos of the ruined coup, the stunned emperor, and then down at his fiercely focused wife. You, Shen breathed, his voice thick with a mixture of absolute awe and sheer disbelief. You just overthrew a political dynasty with mathematics. I told you, I whispered, finally popping the lock and tossing the heavy chains aside. I grinned up at him, breathless and victorious. Nobody terminates my deliverables. Chapter 12. The aftermath of my father's spectacularly failed coup was swift and brutally efficient. The emperor, deeply offended by the bad math and the attempted framing of his best general, stripped the Ming family of their titles and banished them to the remote southern provinces. Just like that, the hostile takeover was officially cancelled. A week after the trial, the Shen estate was finally completely at peace. The perimeter guards had relaxed, the staff were no longer terrified of imminent assassination, and Anan had successfully conquered his second tooth without turning the household into an insomniac war zone. I was sitting in Shen Wei's study, happily drafting a new, highly optimized shift schedule for the night watchman, when Shen himself walked in. He didn't wear his armor today. He was dressed in soft dark blue silk, looking every inch the handsome, noble scholar lord. But his expression was uncharacteristically hesitant, carrying a heavy, nervous energy that instantly put my project manager instincts on high alert. Do we have a problem? I asked, setting down my ink brush. Did the head steward mess up the supply chain again? I told him to use different grain vendors. The grain is fine, Mingyu, Shen said softly. He walked over to the desk and placed a heavy, aged bamboo scroll right in the center of my meticulously organized paperwork. It was bound with a faded red silk ribbon and bore the imperial seal. I looked at the scroll, then up at him. What is this? And test. It is our marriage contract, Shen replied, his voice painfully tight. He pulled up a carved wooden chair and sat down opposite me, leaning forward, his large hands clasped tightly together. The original decree forced upon me by your father and the emperor. My stomach did a sudden, terrifying flip. Okay, why are we reviewing the founding documents? Shen took a slow, deep breath, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Because this union was forged through deceit, manipulation, and force. You were a pawn in your father's game, just as I was the target. But you are no longer that woman. You saved my life. You protected my legacy. You dismantled my greatest enemy in the emperor's own hall. He reached out, his warm fingers gently covering my hand. I told you on the bridge that I love you, Shen continued, his voice dropping to a rough, vulnerable whisper. And because I love you, I must give you the one thing you have never had in this life, a choice. If you wish to leave, if you wish to take in half of my fortune, and live a life entirely free of the Shen family and its burdens, I will petition the emperor to annul this contract. I will not hold you hostage to a vow you did not willingly make. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the most terrifying, powerful warlord in the empire as he voluntarily offered me a golden parachute and the keys to the exit door. He was offering me my freedom. It was the most romantic, deeply honorable thing anyone had ever done for me. Slowly, I slid my hand out from under his. Shen's face fell, a flash of pure agony crossing his features as he braced himself for my departure. I picked up the heavy bamboo scroll. I looked at the imperial seal. And then, with a sharp, decisive motion, I snapped the bamboo in half. Shen flinched, staring at the broken scroll in absolute shock. Mingyu, that is an imperial document. It was a terrible contract, I said dismissively, tossing the broken halves into the wastebasket beneath the desk. The terms were coercive, the terms. Culture was toxic, and frankly, I didn't even get to negotiate my own bonus. It was completely invalid. You destroyed it, Shen stammered, entirely bewildered. You do not want to leave? Shen Wei, I sighed, standing up and walking around the desk. I stopped right in front of him, sliding my hands over his broad shoulders and linking my fingers behind his neck. Why on earth would I leave a home I just spent 6 months restructuring? I have redone the nursery. I have trained the staff. I have finally gotten you to change a diaper in under 2 minutes. Shen's hands instinctively came to rest on my waist, pulling me closer. The agony in his eyes was rapidly melting into a blazing, overwhelming hope. You are staying. I am proposing a new deal, I murmured, leaning down until our foreheads rested against each other. A new lifetime contract. Equal partnership. Full financial transparency. And you still have to take the midnight teething shifts on the weekends. Do we have a deal? A slow, devastatingly handsome smile spread across Shen Wei's face, completely illuminating the dark study. I accept your terms, my brilliant wife, he whispered, his voice thick with raw emotion. For this lifetime and the next, and every one after that. He pulled me down into his lap, sealing the new contract with a kiss that completely erased any lingering thoughts of ledgers, spreadsheets, or modern conveniences. As his arms wrapped tightly around me, holding me like I was his entire world, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this was the absolute best merger of my life. I knew I could grow with and fall in love him. Epilogue. Shannon, if you do not return that 3-month revenue plan this instant, I am putting you on an immediate food improvement plan. My threat echoed through the manicured gardens of the Shen estate, entirely ignored by its target. 3.5-year-old and shrieked with joyful laughter, his little legs pumping furiously as he sprinted down the stone path. A highly important, red-tasseled bamboo scroll clutched triumphantly in his chubby fists. Target is heading toward the koi pond, I yelled, lifting the hem of my embroidered silk skirts and breaking into a light jog. Flank him. From behind a weeping willow tree, the commander of the Northern Army stepped smoothly onto the path. Lord Shen Wei didn't even break a sweat. With the practiced ease of a man who routinely managed both military campaigns and toddler tantrums, he scooped in and up by the waist, hoisting the giggling boy upside down over his broad shoulder. Caught, Shen announced, plucking the scroll from our son's hand. He flipped in an upright, settling the boy effortlessly against his hip. You must redo your escape routes, little dragon. Your mother's eyes and mouthwork is too vast. Dada. Anan cheered, thoroughly unbothered by his capture. He patted his father's cheek, leaving a sticky residue of what I suspected was candied plum. I jogged up to them, entirely out of breath, and snatched the scroll back. Thank you. If he dropped this in the pond, my entire color-coded tax plan would have to be rebuilt from memory. Shen smiled, a warm, devastating expression that was exclusively reserved for his family, and wrapped his free arm around my waist, pulling me in for a lingering kiss. The provincial governors are still terrified of your tax system, you know. They claim your ledgers are dark magic. It's called Microsoft Excel, babe, I murmured against his lips. And until I invent a steam-powered computer, they're going to have to deal with my bamboo spreadsheets. It had been about 3 years since I tore up the marriage contract, and the Shen estate had never been more prosperous. Operating under my newly implemented, highly optimized corporate structure, we had revolutionized the province. I had successfully instituted radical concepts like paid time off, maternity leave, and an HR department, run exclusively by a very bossy, highly promoted Xiao, to handle servant disputes without resorting to the flogging post. My terrifying warlord husband had adapted to the new company culture beautifully. He was a brilliant leader, a devastatingly handsome partner, and most importantly, a fiercely devoted father who took his co-parenting metrics very seriously. "Are you finished with your maternal duties for the day?" Shen asked, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. "I am officially clocking out," I sighed, leaning my head against his shoulder. And then, finally exhausted from his reign of terror, had rested his heavy little head against Shen's neck, and was already blinking sleepily in the warm late afternoon sun. Shen wrapped his heavy woolen cape around my shoulders, drawing both me and our son into a tight, secure embrace. We stood there together by the edge of the pond, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and violet. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of sandalwood, crisp autumn air, and my son's sweet, sticky plum breath. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I would vaguely remember the hum of an office air conditioner, the glaring blue light of dual monitors, and the empty, quiet apartment I used to return to. I had lost indoor plumbing, Wi-Fi, and the miracle of epidurals. But as Shen Wei kissed the top of my head, and then let out a soft, contented sigh in his sleep, I knew I had gained an empire. I had successfully transmigrated from a lonely, overworked corporate drone into a mother, a leader, and the fiercely loved wife of the most powerful man in the realm. Looking back on the sheer chaos of my arrival, the assassins, and the diaper-related disasters, there was only one logical conclusion to draw. That's where this love story ends for now. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more romantic twists. Tell me in the comments what will you have done. Until the next story, keep craving romance.